Peace, salam, and shalom. Welcome, everybody, to our weekly Interfaith Explorations hosted by the Interfaith Center. I'm Sophia Said, your host and Executive Director of the Interfaith Center. Our mission is to reduce the fear and hatred among world religions, and we do that by providing education, promoting dialogue, and creating interfaith relationship building opportunities for people of different faiths. Along with me is my dear friend and professor, Dr. J. McDaniel, right here. This class is also co sponsored by the Cobb Institute in California, and Jay serves on the board of the Cobb Institute, which promotes a process and relational worldview to advance wisdom, harmony, and common good. They live out this philosophy by working to build an ecological civilization. All of our classes are recorded. So, as always, I request you to keep your mics on mute for our teaching part of the class. And as soon as we move into the discussion format, you can unmute yourself and take a part in the discussion. So, today we are talking about imagination, and I want to start with this quick story. And before I hand it out to Jay to introduce our guest. So it's a Gandhi story. One day, Mahatma Gandhi, he stepped on a train, and as the train started to move, one of his shoes slipped off and dropped on the train tracks. Since the train was already moving and he was not able to retrieve his shoe, Gandhi calmly took off his other shoe and threw it back on the tracks where it landed very close to its first to the other part of the pier. So a passenger who was looking at it, he was surprised and he asked Gandhi, why did he do that? And Gandhi smiled and said that the poor man who finds his shoe lying by the train tracks will now have a pair that he can use. So with his eye of the imagination, Gandhi saw a man with bare feet, saw him coming across a lane, across a lone shoe, and desperately searching for the other shoe. And Gandhi saw the disappointment on his face when he didn't find the other shoe. And seeing all of that in his imagination, Gandhi did what he could do in the moment to help. So I'm not an artist, and that is how I practice imagination in the Gandhi way. Always be on lookout for ways to imaginatively practice your own qualities of heart and mind, compassion, hospitality, kindness. But the beauty of imagination is that it has no boundaries or limits. And that's important because we have a special guest here today who is going to introduce us some of those um, beauties of imagination without boundaries and limits. And I'm going to pass it on to Jay to introduce Hope Montgomery. And we are very glad to have you with us today, Hope.
Thanks.
Welcome to the class.
Well, hello to all of you. A special hello to John Fahey, who is the chair of the board of the Cobb Institute. John, we're so glad you're here. And I'm also really, really glad to be able to introduce Hope Montgomery. As a college teacher, you're not supposed to say you have favorite students. So I won't say the phrase, but I think you get my meaning. As soon as I had Hope in a couple of classes at Hendrix College, I knew that she was pretty special. And she thought for herself. She was certainly on a spiritual journey. She was an artist and is an artist. She's a singer-songwriter. She'll sing some songs for us today. She's a visual artist. She's a filmmaker, and we'll see a short film of hers today. But first, I'd like to ask her just to tell a little bit about her story before we do the art. And Hope, I know you were born in Tennessee. Can you tell us a little bit about that background, your relationship with the Methodist Church, both the sympathies and the ambivalences that emerged, whatever you want to say. We're interested.
Sure. My name is Hope, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Sophia and Dr. McDaniel, for inviting me here. I grew up in Tennessee, and I grew up in the United Methodist Church as a child and a youth. Grew up there, and actually really had a great experience. I was really loved the stories, especially that we were taught. Daniel's in the Lion's Den. I remember being young and really loving that. And I uh, went to church camp at a camp called Lakeshore. And that was a big part of my faith growing and changing, and was the place where, when I asked questions, it was not just like stood for, but kind of encouraged. And have you asked this yet? If you've asked that, and I went on to have what I talk about and think about as a falling out in my faith. And as I come away from that falling out, I think of it much more as finding something sacred, even as I attempted to leave something else behind. And these days, I think much more of that is more broadly is not saying no to something, but to say and to something bigger that started to make sense for me and became a better way for me to participate in my own spiritual life, is to drop the Christianity label, which I did in late high school and early college, and to move on to something more like I call myself agnostic, but spiritual but not religious is usually the way I try to describe it to people. So yeah.
So Hope, I remember when you came to Hendrix, you took a class, as I understand, on Hinduism at a certain stage. And was there a moment in that journey when Hinduism seemed more spacious and inviting than your Christianity? Can you just describe that moment for the class?
Definitely. And Hinduism, in about my sophomore year, I took a class called about Hinduism, and really fell in love with the idea of Dharma and this idea that there's a righteousness on the micro and the macro level, and they're attached to each other. And the way we live in our micro, small world affects the macro level. The whole cosmos is kind of interconnected to each other in a way where what we do on a small level matters and perpetuates itself through the universe. And as I found that, it really gave me a new way to think about the world and to think about how the sacred is a part of what I do and why it matters to be drawn towards it.
And so now you work at a Methodist camp in Oregon. By the way, Hope is in Oregon, on the western coast of Oregon. And you describe yourself as an agnostic and spiritual, but not religious, working with Methodist youth in outdoor ministry. I said that to my wife, Kathy, last night. I said, now Hope describes herself as agnostic and spiritual, but not religious. And Kathy said, and she works at a Methodist camp? And I said, yeah. so, so there we are. Hope, the Hope that I knew was and is also an artist. And I've heard you sing many times in live concert. And she's also a filmmaker. And the first thing we're going to do is to show you a little film that she's made. Now, myself, I subscribe to something called process theology, and you sure don't need to. But I think at one stage I asked Hope if she could make a short video introducing the understanding of God and process thought. And she did a great job. And so I think to give you a sample of Hope's video work, we'll show that video. It lasts for it's less than 2 minutes. Is that right, Hope?
It's right at 2 minutes, so that's
Right at 2 minutes. So here's your introduction to the process understanding of God, Hope Montgomery style.
The universe unfolds within a larger life, a love supreme, who is continuously present within each actuality as a lure toward wholeness relevant to the situation at hand. In human life, we experience this reality as an inner calling toward wisdom, compassion, and creativity. Whenever we see these three wisdoms in human life, we see the presence of this love, thus named or not. This love is the soul of the universe, and we are small, but included in its life, not unlike the way in which an embryo dwells within a womb, or fish swim within an ocean, or stars travel through the sky. This soul can be addressed in many ways, and one of the most important words for addressing the soul is God. The stars and galaxies are the body of God, and any forms of life which exist on other planets are enfolded in the life of God, as is life on earth. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. As God beckons human beings towards wisdom, compassion, and creativity, God does not know the outcome of the beckoning in advance, because the future does not exist to be known. But God is steadfast in love, a friend to the friendless, and a source of inner peace. God can be perceived as father, or mother, or lover, or friend. God is love. God is love.
So there you go.
There we go.
That's the Hope that I know. You give her an idea, and she does something beautiful with it. And that's a perfect introduction to the understanding of God, which means something to me. And Hope, I know that you think of yourself as an agnostic, and that's fine. Does that understanding of God mean something to you?
It does. I think that agnosticism for me means something about claiming a belief and a disbelief, and that space gives me the space to believe all I need to understand what the sacred is, in the days that I call it God, what that is to me too. But my deepest understanding of it is something that draws us towards connection and towards meaningful ways to interact with the world, and something like love and some encompassing connection like that.
Now, Hope, the group here, we've been working with something called the spiritual alphabet, and I think you're somewhat familiar with that.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of letters in it. C is for connection. Y is for yearning. C is also for compassion. And you've written a song that you've sung many times. And when I hear that song, I think about connection and compassion. I also think about vulnerability. So let's just invent V for vulnerability. And part of life, is caring for people who are vulnerable, people you really love. And as you sing this song, I think of family members that I love. And sometimes they carry so much of a burden on their shoulders. And I worry about that. So when I first heard this song, that's what I pictured. Can you say a word about the song and then sing it for us?
Yeah, so this song is called Little Atlas, and I wrote it when I was in college. And for me, it's a way of making meaning of living alongside someone else's pain. And, um, and it's a striving force to be like. I wrote it in a time where I was trying to understand I was watching someone else go through something that I wasn't and trying to be a part of it too. So, um, this is Little Atlas. There were tracks in the snow. I followed you home in the cold and brutal winter. I stood at the door, saw you laying on the floor. You couldn't get up to let me enter. So I bust down the door, scooped you up off the floor, and I thought you by the fire. And I stayed by you all day long. I reminded you that you'd done no wrong, and I sang to you all the native songs. So I sang, oh I sang. Don't carry the world, little atlas. It's heavy enough without their sadness. You gotta make it yourself through the mountains. So lay down the world, little atlas, little atlas. When you open your eyes, it was spring outside and the fire, and you had died. Now won't you wander around and wonder aloud what the hell is going on? Then you began to improve. You seem less aloof till I turned to find you gone. And I followed you out the open door, and I found your face down on the forest floor. You were crushed by the weight, just as you'd been before. So I sang, oh I sang. Don't carry the world, little atlas. It's heavy enough without their sadness. You gotta make it yourself through the mountains. So lay down the world, little atlas, little atlas. It's not that there's nothing you can do, it's just the world might be too heavy for only you. Only you. Only just you. Little atlas. Little atlas. stand. Shifted the weight off of you, and I split it in two, and we started your journey again.
I'm guessing that everyone among us has a little atlas. That we know someone who carries such a burden, maybe because they care so much for the world. And I think Hope's song always speaks to me of my love for the little atlases. So thank you, Hope.
Definitely.
Now, Hope, there's another, why don't you show us, before you sing the next one, show us a little of your artwork, if you will. Hope also is a sculptor. Would that be the right word?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so let us look at a little, if you would.
I just have one small example, but I've really in the past 2 years now, gotten excited about stone carving. And we do something that the art center that I work with is called the emerging form, and finding the form within the rock that's already there. And that compels me in a lot of ways, but it's really similar to what I find in songwriting, that you're after something that already exists, and you are just the medium for helping it emerge, which is a really exciting way to engage with art and mediums to me.
So you let the face emerge from the stone?
You just help it emerge. Discovery in stone is what we call the class.
I've got to introduce just a little process theology. Forgive me, everybody. We emphasize persuasive power, not coercive power. The power of cooperating with things, not the power of competing with things. And I love the idea of cooperating with stone to help the face emerge. That's love. That's love. It's not force. It's cooperation. So Hope, tell us about the next song, and then sing it if you will.
This next song is called Breath and Clay, and it's more recent. I wrote Little Atlas about 7 or 8 years ago now. And Breath and Clay is about, I wrote it when I got done reading a sci-fi novel about 2 space explorers, one of whom is falling out with their understanding of the cosmos and their faith. And it was just such a compelling story that I felt really drawn towards. And so this is a kind of my interpretation of that book. But it is a lot about falling out with something and finding something sacred instead. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. This is called Breath and Clay. There's no way that the stars know that we're here. If we can't find mystery there, we'll never find it here. I've tried to
Well, that's too tender to applaud. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
I think in Islam, by the way, I think they have an understanding of human life as at least part breath and clay. Sophia, is that right?
Yes, indeed. Breath and clay, both of them together. That's very true. It was a very humbling song.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hope.
So, Hope, I think we'll kind of open it up now to just a conversation. Um, I've known you long enough to know that uh, doubt is part of your soul.
Mm.
You would not be you without doubt. And so there has to be a place in spirituality for doubt, Hope Montgomery style. And I think that's probably true of a lot of us. You know, many of us are brought up to think, oh, faith is one thing and doubt another. And you got to have faith, but watch out for that doubt. But not for Hope Montgomery, and probably not for most of us here. Do you want to say just a word about the role of doubt in your spiritual pilgrimage?
Yeah. I have, when I was young and Christianity was a big part of my life, the doubting Thomas was always someone I felt close to. I wanted, and I, I think that doubting for me has broadened what um, what my faith is. It's the thing that pushes out and gives me a bigger sense of what we're being drawn towards. And doubt is really a way that imagination lives out for me. This creative sense of looking for a new narrative and carving out something new that we don't know. We don't know what it is, but in order to be someone in the world who creates solutions and seeks justice, we have to look for something that's not there. And doubt and creativity for me are part of each other, and asking what we're not seeing and what we're not acknowledging with the words that we already have.
Speaks to me, Hope, but I've sure never heard anybody link doubt and imagination in just that way. No imagination without doubt. That's an interesting idea. Listen, let's open it up. I want to say to everybody, Hope has some really great music, and she's on Spotify. And in the chat room is her Spotify link. And she really has some gorgeous songs. And so if you're interested, I hope you will listen to Hope's music. Hope, we got one comment from Sally so far and one from Linda Loney. Sally says, breath and clay reminds me of the Valley of Dry Bones. Sally, you want to say anything more about that or leave it at that?
Oh, I don't know if Hope is familiar, but let me get the video on here. In the what Christians call the Old Testament, there's the story, and I'm sorry I can't say what book it's in, but the prophet was shown a valley of just bones. And God made the bones come together and knit them together with sinews and flesh, but they still weren't alive until he blew the spirit into them.
Mm-mm.
So I mean, we are clay and breath, yes.
I love that imagery. I mean, it to me it echoes death too, and they're not one without the two of them. Just like faith and doubt for me. So
Is there someone who can fill in the citation for me? What book is that in? Was that Isaiah, maybe? I don't know.
Al Gephardt can. Al Gephardt can.
I think it's in Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Because I just read it for Lenten season. And I don't know which book, which chapter it's in. I think it's 37.
Well, I'll recommend it to Hope.
Thank you.
It's a very moving passage.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely take a look.
Dan, I see your hand up. I want to call on Lynn Deloney unless, is it on this subject? Go ahead if it is.
No, it's another subject.
Okay, let me get somebody that raised their hand first, then you're next. Dan. Lynn, do you want to say something? Are you there?
Yeah, did I actually raise my hand? I'm not sure if I did, but I'll say, yeah, I just was following what Sally said and thinking about that second song and just an incredible gentle power. I said this sort of gentle, soft voice singing. I mean, and I think it is Ezekiel. I was just looking it up. I don't know the numbers, but in some ways it's a little bit scary in the scripture. I mean, there's a power there, but I just was struck by the incredible power of your gentle song. And I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you.
Dan, thank you, Lynn. Hey, Lynn, it's good to see you. By the way, Lynn Hope also went to Hendricks College.
Awesome.
And I will add, we met in Jay's class 40 years ago. 41 years ago this spring, I guess. We weren't even dating then, but watch out for
you and your wife. You and your wife.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant Hope. You and Hope for just a little bit, and I thought, oh wait.
No, my wife Becca teaches at SMU or Perkins School of Theology, and we have a lot to blame Jay for.
I don't apologize. Dan, go ahead.
I wanted to link doubt with truth, actually, and hearken back to Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, where he helped me understand the distinction between truthfulness and honesty, because I'd always thought they were synonymous, but he helped me see that honesty is the ability to directly and straightforwardly say what you're thinking, feeling, and believing without brushing it over with diplomacy, you might say. Whereas truthfulness is the ability to take what you honestly think, feel, and believe and hold it up for examination and ask, is it true? Because it may not be. So that little bit of self-doubt, detachment from one's own opinion, can lead to a deeper understanding of what is actually true. And I was stimulated by that connection you have with a sense of doubt that I think has a lot of value. The other thing I wanted to share is about the word imagination, because in my tradition, the Baha'i faith, imagination is considered a quality of the soul. We have outer powers that enable us to perceive things, our senses, but then we have inner powers that are described as the power of imagination, thought, comprehension, and memory. And these are the inner powers that we use to make sense out of what we perceive from the outer realm. And I'm really glad you chose that letter to focus on today. Thank you.
And I'll say I have a close connection with a Baha'i group in Florida, the Southern Flame connection there. I did a camp with them, and for several years have kept in touch with them because they've helped me understand the world in a new way. And yeah, so appreciate that connection. Thank you.
Sophia, do you want to say anything about the role of imagination in Islam? You don't have to, but I wondered if you wanted. You're muted, Sophia. Still muted. Can't hear you. Sophia, if you can't, I will. Oh. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
I see Al raised his hand.
Al, go ahead, Al. Unmute, Al.
Yeah. I would add another word to creativity, and that's ambivalence.
Hmm.
I walked into a therapist one time, and he started by asking me, well, how are you feeling? And I said, oh, I'm so ambivalent. And I was really down on myself from being ambivalent. And he said to me, ambivalence is an okay place to be. And then he said, creativity comes out of ambivalence. And that just made my day. In fact, I've lived with that for many years. And Hope, I'd like to know, who are some of the artists, be they musicians or be they, visual artists that really feed your soul and that you listened to or looked up to?
The first one that comes to mind the quickest for me is probably my biggest influence. His name is Eve Barsley, and his band is Klimsnide, and I can put that over in the chat because both of those are hard to spell. But a lot of his writing is all of these different poetic ways to juxtapose, like put two things in juxtaposition. And he writes about faith, and he writes about doubt, and he writes about everything in between. And he's a big influence for me, and he's been writing for a long time. David Bazan is another one who he wrote in the Christian community and then had a public falling out with his own faith, and has always been really engaged with the idea of what morality means, and asks a lot of big questions, hard questions about his own struggles with drugs and alcohol, and does that in really creative ways. Those come to mind. But recently, Jamila Woods speaks a lot to me. I've been seeking out more and more female artists because I find that they inspire a voice that sounds like mine, and that's been really helpful for me in imagining who I can be and what my voice can sound like, and the power it can take in the role I have. So Jamila Woods recently has struck a chord. I can put all of those in the chat.
Anybody else want to say something?
I had a question, but I'm not sure how to raise my hand on Zoom officially.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering, you spoke a lot about your childhood and also Hendrix. And I was wondering, I think this past year for a lot of people with the pandemic and everything, it's been really transitional and kind of forced us to like live in different ways and like view ourselves in different ways. And I was wondering if you're willing to share if there's anything more recent that's kind of shaped the way that your art's going and your perception of creativity and your spirituality.
I really appreciate that question because like everyone here, the pandemic has been a huge force in my life, and I will say that the first thing that comes forward for me is the new sense of vulnerability. I've found that since we have less contact with socializing and being in community face to face, I find a lot more fear in connection, and I found that really present in my creative work for the first time. Some of the first times in my life, in really brutal ways, have rubbed up against a stage fright and a sense of a fear of being so vulnerable in a way that I, in person, hadn't been afraid of in the same way. But this distance between all of us has really changed my relationship with it, and that was going on for months and months of the pandemic, where I wasn't sure if that vulnerability, especially in sharing art, was something that I might continue being interested in. And that scared me because I do have a sense that, one thing I learned from Hendrix is that we listen for the need of the world and the thing we have to offer it. And a lot of my understanding of my own art is that this is a thing that I can offer to the world. And if I'm too scared to offer it, that's been a really big hurdle for me. I find a lot more fear in socializing and connecting with people, and I'm just recently kind of coming to terms with that in ways where I just accept that fear as a part of it. And just grappling with stage fright and vulnerability in new ways. And that journey is not over for me, but that's definitely what I think about in your question. I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Um, I don't know if Sophia's mic is working now. Is it working now, Sophia?
It is, yes. I'm sorry about that.
On the issue of imagination, you don't have to, but um, do you have any thoughts on the role of imagination in Islam that you'd like to share?
So I personally do not come from an imagination culture, and I don't know what is imagination culture, but it's in my mind a culture that promotes imagination. And partly it's because I personally believe that imagination, although it's really important, but it's also ambiguous and understudied in Islam. It's important because it connects us with very important concepts in Islam like dreaming, visions, prophecy. And at the same time, it's understudied because of very strong dogmatic focus on the concept of God, which you cannot see and you cannot visualize. Um, and you cannot imagine. So, God is unlike anything that you can see or touch. In Islam, the concept of God. But the same concept actually just is such a big, deep motivation for imagination because if God is unlike anything you see in the world, then God is. What else can you do with the concept of God than imagine through the 99 qualities of God that are given to us in our faith? So there are 99 names of God, which are very much qualities of heart and mind. And that's how we try to understand God. We don't make pictures of God. We don't. So I think imagination plays a very, very important role, especially in the life of a mystic. I think imagination tries to overcome this fundamental tension in Islam between God's immanence and God's transcendence. It remains ambiguous, but I think it's very, very important for a seeker's spiritual journey who seeks to understand God. Does it make sense, Jay?
Of course it does. Of course it does. Yes. Um, Sophia, yesterday at the Cobb Institute gathering, where none of us were present, I was present. I know you weren't present, but it so happens we had a speaker that was steeped in Islam. And he introduced us to a thinker whose name you've never heard. It's Henry Corbin, Corbin. But Corbin coined the phrase, the term, the imaginal, Imaginal, the imaginal. And he was trying to use the word to name the fact that there are things that are very real to us that we don't see with our physical eyes, or smell with our nose, or hear with our ears, but that nonetheless have a vivid presence to us. We discover them. They come to us. And one would be, for example, dreams.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about a dream, it's very, very real. But it lives in the realm of the imaginal. And Corbin said in classical Islam, angels and jinn and other kinds of creatures, you might say, live in the realm of the imaginal. And so it's not that they're unreal, it's just that they're real in a different way. And I think that for me, it would help our culture, our Western culture, if we would wake up to the reality of the imaginal. and take it much, much more seriously. And that takes me back to Hope and singer-songwriters and visual artists and the like. I think that artists are generally speaking more sensitive to the realm of the imaginal than a lot of the rest of us. And so one of your gifts, to my mind, is to bring us into that as best you can. And just a little process theology. I think this is the third time I've mentioned it, and I promise I won't anymore. This is it. But
don't stop.
But it does have the idea that God lures us inside ourselves. God lures us, beckons us. And one thing God lures us to do is to imagine. And for example, to imagine the world from the point of view of another person, to imagine the perspective of another. Not my perspective, oh Lord, but their perspective. And that takes imagination. And also newness or novelty, not a fear of novelty, but an embrace of novelty. Newness can be good. It can be beautiful. So a lure toward newness through the imagination.
Jay?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I remember quite a while ago, some sort of a scale of how change takes place in society. And through what sort of disciplines, or where does it happen? And what I remember is that up on the far end of those who initiate change or transformation in society were the artists and the philosophers. And as you went down the scale, one of those that were close to the end were the theologians. People who were so set in their dogma, but it takes the artists who are free to imagine and who live with ambivalence or questions, and therefore can think in new ways to kind of get it going.
And I think I'll jump in and what you're talking about there. I wanted to bring this quote forward as something that is inspiring to me, and I was drawn to first. And it's from Martin Luther King Jr. You're probably familiar with it. It says, every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. This is the judgment and life's most persistent and urgent question. What are we doing for others? And it reminds me of what you're saying. You were talking earlier about truth, and the phrase creative altruism for me, whenever I read that from Martin Luther King Jr., told me something about the way I want to fit into the world, and something about imagination is that sometimes we have to create it or be the medium in between something that already exists, so that it will be a part of our experience on Earth. And that's really compelling to me about what we're called to do as far as being a part of the sacred.
It's interesting the way Al said that theologians are on the other end on the other extreme of where the imagination ends. And I think it's really important for us to underscore and understand the importance of the artists, because there are generations of people who have grown up in environments hostile to the imagination, who have been told that they should not imagine because that's how we control human beings. Imagination helps you dream, and it helps you dream of a better world. It helps you see what you want to create. And I think that's why the role of the artists, visual artists, musicians, it's extremely important, because those of us who are not grown up in environments which were conducive to imagination, artists help us learn how to imagine, how to dream. So their role is very, very important.
Carmen?
Well, I think the role of the artist in whatever realm is so very important in describing the numinous and the mystical, because there are no logical words. There is no concrete way to describe something. You have to, well, from my perspective, it has to be approached from the emotional and the artistic and the creative, and the inspire some sense of amazement and awe for something we don't understand anyway. So we have to have that creativity and that art and that way to describe something between the lines, to talk about what you're not saying.
Hope, we normally close this in about 5 minutes. And I want to give you a chance to say something. I wish we had time for you to sing another song. Do you have a 3-minute song?
I tend to write long ones. So.
I know you. Hope has actually written a song. She's one of the few people I know that's read Moby Dick. I mean the whole thing. And you wrote a song about it, didn't you?
I did. It's called Ahab's Ghost, and it's about Ahab and myself, or the narrator, having this dialogue about how to get the most out of life when you're scared of mundanity or something like that.
How long does it take to sing it?
About 5 minutes.
You want to sing a part of it? We don't have very many closing announcements. Not the whole song, just a few lyrics from that.
A verse or two?
Yeah. I didn't practice this one, so see how fresh it is. I sailed out over the deep blue sea. It's not at all what I thought it would be. I set out in November to fish for a whale. I remembered old Jonah and Ishmael. Now I've been here for months with no stories to tell. Now I've been out west and I've sailed out east, but neither destination could put me at ease. I've been plotting our progress in notches and degrees, but any point on this map give me peace. On an impulse I dove to the bottom of the sea. I swam down to the ocean's depth. If I could escape life, then I could escape death. I hid inside a cold, dark cave. You wouldn't believe I found Ahab's grave. And I said, "Rise, Captain Ahab, I need you today." And not all of it, but enough to perk your interest.
Hey, Hope, thank you. And I want to say a special thanks to John Fahey for coming. John is, it's my knowledge, on Zoom calls 24 hours a day. And I just appreciate you being here, John. John, this is Sophia. Sophia, say hello to John. He's chair of the Cobb Institute board.
Hi, John. Yeah.
Hi, Sophia.
Well,
Nice
thank
to
you
meet
for
you.
joining us, John. And hope it's almost time for us to close. So, on behalf of our whole class, I want to say thank you. There was such a sweet and tender and gentle vibrational frequency in our class today. And that was definitely because of you. So, thank you for bringing that to our class. And we hope to have you again one day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for letting me be a part of the discussion. It's exciting.
And I just have to say, Hope, that I didn't think you could be lovelier than the way Jay describes you, but apparently you are. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have one quick announcement for our class before we close with one of our poems today. So next session is our last class for our winter session. And Jay and I have decided not to invite a new speaker from outside because we would like to hear from some of you if you would like to. So the plan is that we'll share a few stories about the spiritual alphabet that we have not touched since last year, the ones that we have not spoken about. But I also want to invite all of you to think about the spiritual wheel, look at the spiritual alphabet, pick something which you feel strongly defines you or your life at this moment in time. And if you want to share a story, a poem, a quote, a video, anything, bring it with you to the class. We would like all of us to be the teachers in the next class. I would appreciate it if you let me know ahead of time on email. So if we have a lot of that, then I can plan the session accordingly. But think about the invitation. And if you choose not to share anything, that's fine too. And with that, I want to close today with a poem which I just picked when Hope was singing her second song, I think. Yes, second song. So we will close with one of the Hafiz's poem again. And the name of the poem is I Wish I Could Speak Like Music. And Hafiz says, I wish I could speak like music. I wish I could put the swaying splendor of the fields into words, so that you could hold truth against your body and dance. And dance. I am trying the best I can with this crude brush, my tongue, to cover you with light. I wish I could speak like music. I wish I could speak like divine music. I want to give you the sublime rhythms of this earth and the sky. I want to give you the wonders of the body of the earth and the sky's limbs, as they joyously spin and surrender against God's luminous breath. Hafiz wants you to hold me against your precious body and dance and dance. I wish I could speak like divine music. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. We'll see you next week.